live out our identity in Christ in the modern world under a particular overarching theme of really about our relationship of work, and that's everything of work, not just your job, and rest. If you haven't been around the last couple of weeks, I've got two incredibly hard acts to follow in Ruth, who spoke about our identity in God, and Richard, who spoke about the world of work last week. I'm glad he's up in creche today, so I don't have to have him sitting there taking notes. Do go check those out on YouTube if you haven't seen them for the first time or again. I think you'll find them of huge benefit. Today, though, I get the privilege really of speaking to you about a topic really close to my heart, particularly since my wife and I became the proud owner of a toddler that most of you know and know to avoid as he's running around. Well, that's not true. It's not true, is it? You can't say something up here that's not true. But also, I think a vital word for the time and the city that we live in, the delights of Christian rest. As an introvert, and since it's meant to be a restful day, I thought we'd start with the least traumatic piece of audience participation I could possibly think of. So we're going to go with the classic show of hands. Okay? I only have two questions for you. Who here is tired today? That's quite a lot of us, isn't it? That's a lot of hands. Okay, so maybe, right, you're lethargic. The weather can do that, can it? Like, we got out of the car earlier, and Mary said to me, oh, it feels quite close. I was like, yeah, it does. Even though it rained, it does. Maybe you're up late last night. Okay, so that was most of you, which I was maybe not expecting. But now, who here have been tired during the last month? Or maybe, if you're feeling brave, you don't need to put your hand up. Who's been tired more often than not? That's still a lot of hands, isn't it? Maybe you've got a challenging job. Maybe you've got young kids at home. Maybe you just enjoy the aeronaut a bit too much. There's no shame here. But it's most of us, right? And it's no surprise. Britain has some of the longest working hours in Europe. When we're not working, we have home, kids, and errands to attend to. And when we're not doing that, we live in one of the world's great cities, and it's home to every type of fun and distraction available. So that's from Netflix, if you're on your couch, to any bar or restaurant you can conceive, if you're working your way through them by the alphabet, suiting almost any pocket. According to one study, the average British worker works an extra 469 hours above and beyond their contract per year for free. That's 10 hours per week. It's a number that traditionally goes up as well in times of economic uncertainty like these. It's good to volunteer, isn't it? And that's not saying about all the other time we spend doing things that aren't usually considered work, but are still a real effort, like spending time at home or looking after children. And although mental health is a complex issue, I don't think it's any coincidence that an age where our achievements and our home life and our bodies are increasingly on show through social media, that as many as 1 in 4 UK adults are diagnosed with a mental health condition. That's just diagnosed. That's not suffering from. So, does God have anything to say to a country struggling through a fog of tiredness, overworked, and facing an epidemic of mental ill health? The answer, of course, is yes. Our Father has come to offer us rest. Today, we're going to go on a whistle-stop tour of the theology of rest. A brief run-through is all we have time for, but to explore more, I urge you to start with the work of John Mark Comer, whose book Garden City inspired the series, and In the Spirit of Rest inspired much of the content for this talk. In particular, in case you're playing Oak Tree Sermon Bingo, I'd recommend the Bridgetown Church podcast, which includes a series exploring the topic in depth. But back to today, though. I want to discover 3 things together. Firstly, what is rest? Not just sitting down, or watching TV, or having a nap, although for some people it can be all of those things. but a life-giving rhythm of creation. Second, I want us to discover rest's power, not just for our body, but as resistance against the pattern of this world. And finally, I want us to discover that rest is for us, for me, and for you, Londoner, director, t-shirt, one job, two jobs, parent, socialite, Netflix lover, student, retiree. It does not matter. We all need God's rest. God rested, and so can you. So what is rest? Well, we're going to start at the start in Genesis 1. Let's read together from verse 27. You don't need to if you don't. I don't have the page number. It's really inconvenient, but it's right at the beginning. So I'm hoping you can find this one. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." You can tell it's a restful day because we read this last week. Then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food, and to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds in the sky, and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food." And so it was so. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. The creator of the universe rested. Now, the word here translated rest is the Hebrew word Shabbat, which means to cease or to stop. It can also be translated celebrate. It's where we get the word Sabbath. In fact, it would be equally correct here to translate the text, God Sabbathed. That doesn't mean God was tired. Rather, it means he took time to appreciate what he had done. He saw that it was very good. It's that moment, or maybe not so much in London, but when you finish cutting the grass, or perhaps running around the hockey pitch, or writing a sermon, or dealing with those bills, or whatever you do on a Saturday, you sit back on the couch or in the garden, perhaps your toddler is in a different postcode, and you just revel in the work you've completed. God's rest should be filled with delights. A day to celebrate work well done, what God has made, and your life in it. There are a few other things to notice here. Next, God worked for 6 days. Some of us need to learn that bit, don't we? And rested for one. I think that's most of us. John Mark Comer argues that in doing so, he worked a rhythm into the fabric of creation, as vital as eating, drinking, or in some cases even breathing. As more and more people in our society ignore that rhythm, perhaps driven by an identity based on achievement, as a lot of Londoners are, sucked in by advertising, need to just acquire more stuff, or just lost in the escapism and self-medication our city has to offer. We see the sort of mental health, physical and spiritual fatigue we mentioned earlier. It's a rhythm I personally ignored to my and my family's cost, chasing the approval of someone I couldn't please, and unwilling to trust God for our financial security and accept him as enough. I worked 13-hour days despite having a young baby at home, lived at the mercy of my phone, to the point I actually spent time at a friend's funeral, furiously answering emails. And I eventually ended up crying on the sofa, back just around where Gavin's sitting there. After 3 days of being so tense, I was completely unable to sleep. Remember, we are created in God's image. Productivity drops off dramatically after around 50 or 55 hours in a week, or roughly 6 days' work. Ignoring God's rest not only affects your body, it affects your soul. Theologian Walter Brueggemann says, people who keep the Sabbath live all 7 days differently. And that's what it does. Resets the pattern in your life. Moving on. Next, notice the blessings. God blesses 3 things in this passage. Firstly, he blesses the animals. If we skip back a little further, looking at verse 25. Be fruitful and multiply. Go forth and create life. Then he blesses us in the same way. Verse 27. Be fruitful and multiply. Go forth and create life. And then verse 30, he blesses a day. Can a day be life-giving? What's more, he made it holy. What makes a day holy? When I think of the word holy, my mind immediately goes to God's presence. Perhaps holy ground, some people in expression might say, or the Holy of Holies, where God was manifestly present in the temple in the Old Testament. Perhaps you think of the cloud during the Exodus. Maybe that scene from Indiana Jones, you know, when they open the Ark of the Covenant and the faces, and just me. Can't just be me. But Sabbath isn't a box or a place, it's a time. God has set apart a life-giving time every week for you to be filled with his presence. Philip Carey is a theologian, former Harvard scholar, and his book Good News for Anxious Christians said, it is the holy time set aside to receive the greatest gift God ever has to give, which is himself in his own beloved Son. Now, in our home, we're still only just starting with this, really. I'm sure some of you are well ahead of us. Others perhaps are behind. But to those who are hearing this maybe for the first time, and if you had your hand up earlier, maybe your first reaction is, where's the hub for this? How do I sign up? I want you to let you know there's no real to-do list about it. To begin, you just have to Sabbath. You just have to pick a day, or perhaps a few hours, as a day is too hard, and stop. Stop working or striving. Ignore your to-do list and worry about tomorrow later. Stop worrying about what you don't have and delight in what you do. Stop taking a day off and instead take time to enjoy. If you're an introvert, spend time alone. If you're an extrovert, gather your good friends together. Spend time in quiet and prayer. For us, that means Sundays start to look a bit different from the rest of the week. We spend time together as a family, or maybe with close friends. We prepare the day before. We cook and clean. Ironically, resting does actually take a bit of work in advance. Then we eat and drink. It's meant to be a celebration, isn't it? Something we really delight in. And then we delight as well in leaving the dishes to sit for Monday. We try to stay away from technology. Or your email, if you send one, won't get answered. Certain websites aren't allowed. We're working on phones as well. We don't plan the rest of the week. We pray together as a couple. Let me tell you, like for me, there was nothing so life-giving as one day a week where I didn't have to strive to achieve anything. And that's just my personality. Other people have other hang-ups, but that's mine. For those who are more reluctant, my guess is you fall into one of two camps. First, those who, like I did, thought, where on earth am I going to find the time for that? Chances are you're goal-orientated or a high achiever. You're living what I'm going to call the Daft Punk life, work it harder, make it better, do it faster, makes it stronger. That's all I'm going to do with that. So, Sod film, we don't need to do it again. Stay with me. Let's continue our tour in Deuteronomy 5, where we find the 10 Commandments. We're reading from verse 12. I'm sorry I didn't do the page numbers. Observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Do not make it profane, as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your ox, your donkey, or any of your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Now, there's a lot in there, but if you take nothing else away, remember that Sabbath is a command. The only spiritual practice to make that list. Not prayer, not fasting, not attending church on a Sunday. It's a gift as well, but first, it's a command. And what's more, God's rules are usually there for a reason. A reason I found out the hard way. My additional challenge would be, what desire is holding you back? You may notice actually the second time the Ten Commandments feature in the Bible, the key change, or one of the key changes, is that part about remember you were slaves in Egypt. Here Moses is an old man, speaking not long before his death to the children of the Israelites God let out of Egypt, with no experience of the slavery God's people had suffered under Pharaoh, if you know the story. What some of you might not know about that story is that as slaves, the Israelites are thought to have been building what are called supply cities, essentially storehouses to hold Egypt's extra stuff. Mounds of grain, I don't know, what do you have if you're an Egyptian, chariots or something? But the parallels with our society today are quite striking, aren't they? We have conveniences that Pharaoh could only have dreamed of. Yet the adverts we see, the social media we consume, everything is designed to keep us wanting more. And meanwhile, we've got self-storage units springing up along the A40, don't we? For people to store their extra stuff. I don't know about you, but when I'm home, I feel like I have enough stuff bursting out of every cupboard, really, in our flat. But when I'm on a tube and there's advertising everywhere, or when I'm in Westfield, not so much, right? I could buy lots of stuff, to be honest with you. But now Christ is risen, isn't he? Evil is defeated. The temple curtain that separated the Holy of Holies from the people has been torn in two. We are free and come and meet with God. All we have got to do is stop. Are we really going to let the need for more stuff, or some other's approval, a tidy home, maybe a better job title, a higher salary, just, whatever we saw online shopping that week, get in the way of that? Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, in his book, Sabbath's Meaning for the Modern Man, puts it like this. The world has our hands, but our souls belong to someone else. 6 days a week, we dominate the world. Rich last week. On the 7th day, we try to dominate the self. Stop striving. Stop shopping. Sabbath is a statement that God is enough. The second camp, and this seems to be the attitude of much of the church, who in my experience talk about rest very little and the Sabbath even less, is that Sabbath sounds like a lot of rules, essentially. If the other lot are living the Daft Punk life, not do it again. These guys are living the Alice Cooper life, aren't they? School's out for summer. School's out forever. I didn't promise to be able to sing. I've lost the place now. But let's have fun when we can. We've got like God's around everywhere, so we can have we sort of have a restful attitude all week long. That's fine. Perhaps there's so much to do. The devil doesn't take a day off. There's that saying some people say, maybe in more traditional circles than this, I'll rest when I'm dead, etc., etc. You might say that Sabbath is of a different time, something legalistic, part of the old civic law that was abolished essentially by the victory of Christ. You wouldn't be alone either. In fact, an Oak Tree favourite, if you still have your bingo cards out, N.T. Wright might say something at least slightly similar, or at least argue that since Christ is with us, we can know God's rest all the time, and it isn't a priority for any given day. But let's skip forward again to one of the key passages often used to justify that perspective. Now we're reading, so about 3/4 of the way through your Bible probably, reading from Mark at 2, verses 23 to 28. One Sabbath, so at least at that time, Jesus and his followers obviously hadn't ditched that concept just yet. Jesus was going through the grain fields. As his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" He answered, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need?" It's interesting it's David, actually, because David is an Old Testament character who's one of the only Old Testament people to have a New Testament relationship with God. That's a big can of worms I can't open here. Please speak to Tim. In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat, and he also gave some to his companions. Then he said to them, Sabbath was made for man. Notice the call back again to creation, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. Now, what's happening here would actually be very controversial. Jesus and his disciples are breaking something called the Mishnah, which was an extra set of rules laid down by the religious leader of the time, the Pharisees essentially, to prevent people from coming too close to breaking God's law. John Mark Comer suggests thinking of it something like a fence near a dangerous drop. You never put it right at the edge. You always set it back a little in case someone, possibly a vicar, I couldn't say, wants to take a selfie or do something silly like that. It's kind of like here. The point Jesus is making here isn't that rules aren't important on the Sabbath. It's a gift for us. And I don't mean just a gift in general. I mean a gift for you specifically. We bought our son, Fraser, recently, who's up in creche right now, a kite after a trip we went on, and he is delighted with it. Almost every day he goes to our window and he looks out to see if there's enough wind to fly it. Now, if I had given that gift rather than to my son, to my dad instead, he probably would have been very polite. But deep down, I doubt he would have been that delighted. Delight looks very different to different people, doesn't it? I love to run. I find it peaceful and life-giving. It's not an opinion my wife shares. What I'm saying is Sabbath isn't a to-do list or a list of rules. Jen Hatmaker, in her book, An Experimental Mutiny Against Excess, which I just love the name of, says this: God ordained the Sabbath for us, not just another requirement from us. So is this allowed or is this not allowed on the Sabbath isn't the right question. A far better question would be, is this restful? An even better one might be, is this worship? So 2 filters, you can put that through. Or even better still, how is this shaping me? Is it bringing me closer to God? God's rest isn't just something for the future, It's available now. Hebrews 4 says, make every effort to enter his rest. Present tense. All that to say, entertainment, exercise, friends can all be good things, are all good things. But at some point, we have to say enough. Entertainment's always distraction. It isn't always rest. Theologian Dallas Willard calls busy the greatest enemy of the spiritual life. I'm going to take a rest now. But before I do, everyone that had their hands up earlier, we're going to have communion in a few minutes. So if you're tired today, if you're tired in your soul, if the pressures of work, home, family, or life in the city are weighing you down, if you need to stop, there is hope. God has given you the gift of rest. Don't ignore the rhythm of creation. Take a holy day every week to dwell in his delight. You are not what you earn. You are not what you produce. You're not how tidy your home is, how empty your inbox is, or how perfect your children are. You are God's, and you are free. You're not a slave. Don't act like one. It really is for you. Amen.